across the river valleys and forested plains of Central Europe, long before written history recorded the movements of tribes and kings. A complex network of communities was already developing patterns of life that would eventually give rise to Celtic society. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, settlements scattered across the upper Danube basin and the Alpine foothills were participating in economic, technological, and cultural systems that connected much of the European continent. Archaeological evidence indicates that between approximately 1300 and 800 BCE, these societies underwent significant transformations in burial customs, metallurgy, and regional exchange. Although the term Celtic would only appear centuries later in the writings of Mediterranean historians such as Herodotus, the material culture emerging in Central Europe during this period reveals the early foundations of what scholars identify as Proto-Celtic populations. During the Late Bronze Age, Central Europe was characterized by a broad cultural horizon commonly known as the Urnfield culture. This archaeological complex extended across large regions of modern Austria, southern Germany, Hungary, and the Czech lands, forming one of the most influential cultural systems of prehistoric Europe. Its name derives from a distinctive funerary practice, cremation burials in which the ashes of the deceased were placed inside ceramic vessels and interred in organized cemetery fields. Archaeologists uncovered thousands of such burial grounds during excavations conducted throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. These cemeteries reveal remarkable consistency in ritual practice, suggesting that widely shared beliefs about death and ancestry connected communities over considerable distances. The emergence of cremation as a dominant burial custom marked a significant shift from earlier Bronze Age traditions, which often involved inhumation beneath burial mounds. The widespread adoption of urn burial indicates the development of shared cultural norms across Central Europe. Ceramic urns discovered in these cemeteries often display standardized shapes and decorative motifs, implying the transmission of craft techniques between communities. Records from archaeological surveys show that some burial sites contained hundreds of graves, indicating relatively stable and organized settlements nearby. Such cemeteries functioned not only as places of burial, but also as markers of community identity and continuity across generations. Settlement patterns from this period suggest that populations were increasingly concentrated along fertile river valleys, particularly those associated with the Danube and its tributaries. These waterways served as vital corridors for transportation and exchange. Archaeologists uncovered numerous habitation sites situated near riverbanks, where agricultural land was both productive and accessible. Evidence from charred plant remains indicates that these communities cultivated cereal crops such as barley, wheat, and millet. Alongside agriculture, pastoral herding played an important role in the local economy. Remains of domesticated cattle, sheep, and pigs appear frequently in excavation layers associated with late Bronze Age settlements. Metallurgy formed another crucial aspect of economic life. Bronze tools and weapons discovered across Central Europe demonstrate a high level of technical proficiency. Artisans produced axes, sickles, spearheads, and ornamental objects using casting techniques that had evolved over centuries of experimentation. Metal artifacts recovered from burial sites often appear alongside personal ornaments such as bracelets, torques, and pins, indicating the symbolic importance of bronze craftsmanship within social structures. Archaeological analyses of metal composition suggest that copper and tin used in bronze production were obtained through long-distance exchange networks. These trade networks linked Central European communities with distant regions of the continent. Archaeologists uncovered amber from the Baltic Sea in southern German burial sites, while Mediterranean artifacts occasionally appear in settlements north of the Alps. Such discoveries indicate that Bronze Age trade routes extended across vast geographic areas. River systems facilitated much of this movement. The Danube, in particular, connected inland Central Europe with regions near the Black Sea and southeastern Europe. Through these corridors, goods and technologies circulated between societies that otherwise remained geographically separated. Excavations also reveal increasing signs of social differentiation within these communities. Some graves contain elaborate assemblages of weapons, jewelry, and imported goods, while others include only simple ceramic vessels. This disparity suggests the presence of emerging social hierarchies. Certain individuals, likely community leaders or skilled warriors, appear to have received more elaborate burial treatment than others. Archaeologists often interpret such patterns as evidence for the early development of elite social classes within late Bronze Age societies. Although written language was not yet present among these populations, linguistic reconstruction provides additional insight into cultural developments during this era. Scholars studying Indo-European language evolution propose that the Proto-Celtic linguistic branch began diverging from other Indo-European dialects sometime during the late Bronze Age. This reconstruction relies on comparative analysis of later Celtic languages, including those preserved in ancient inscriptions and medieval manuscripts. The geographical distribution of archaeological cultures associated with Proto-Celtic populations aligns closely with regions dominated by Urnfield cultural traditions. Material culture further illustrates the degree of interaction between communities. Similar weapon styles appear across large areas of Central Europe, suggesting shared martial traditions and technological exchange. Bronze swords discovered in burial contexts exhibit standardized forms that archaeologists classify into regional typologies. These weapons likely held both practical and symbolic importance, representing the growing prestige of warrior elites within Bronze Age society. The presence of such objects in graves indicates that martial identity was already becoming embedded within social organization. Religious practices during this period remain more difficult to reconstruct, yet certain archaeological patterns provide valuable clues. Ritual deposits discovered in rivers and wetlands suggest that natural landscapes held spiritual significance for these communities. Weapons and ornaments have been recovered from riverbeds across Central Europe, often in locations where no settlement evidence exists nearby. Many researchers interpret these finds as offerings placed deliberately into water as part of ritual ceremonies. This practice would later become widely associated with Iron Age Celtic religious traditions. Environmental factors also played an important role in shaping the development of these societies. The varied landscapes of Central Europe, including river valleys, upland forests, and alpine foothills, provided diverse economic opportunities. Agricultural productivity in fertile lowlands supported larger populations, while forested areas supplied timber and game. Meanwhile, mineral resources such as copper and salt were extracted in mountainous regions. Control over such resources likely contributed to the rising influence of certain communities and leaders. Archaeological excavations in alpine regions reveal early mining activities that would later expand significantly during the Iron Age. Evidence from preserved mining tools and wooden support structures indicates that Bronze Age workers already possessed the technical knowledge required to extract valuable minerals from underground deposits. Salt, in particular, played an important economic role because of its use in food preservation. Communities located near salt deposits could trade this resource widely, strengthening their position within regional exchange networks. Over time, the interaction of agriculture, metallurgy, trade, and social hierarchy created increasingly complex communities across Central Europe. Settlement networks expanded, technological knowledge circulated more widely, and regional cultural identities became more clearly defined. These developments did not occur suddenly but unfolded gradually across several centuries of economic and social evolution. By the end of the Late Bronze Age, Central Europe had developed a stable network of interconnected societies sharing similar burial traditions, technological practices, and economic systems. Although these populations left no written accounts of their own history, the archaeological record provides substantial evidence of their organization and cultural cohesion. The communities associated with the Urnfield cultural horizon formed the structural foundations from which later Celtic societies would emerge during the early Iron Age. As technological innovation continued and iron metallurgy began to replace bronze, the societies of Central Europe entered a new phase of development that would eventually produce the elite warrior cultures associated with the early Celtic world. Before we continue deeper into the history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss the next Nightfall history documentary. If you enjoy exploring ancient civilizations and forgotten worlds, your support helps the channel continue producing long-form historical content like this. And while you're watching, feel free to leave a comment below and share which part of the documentary you find most interesting. Your feedback helps shape future episodes and topics. During the early Iron Age, Central Europe witnessed the rise of powerful aristocratic communities that controlled trade, metal production, and regional authority. Around the 8th century BCE, societies across the Alpine and Danubian regions began undergoing profound economic and social changes. Archaeological evidence suggests that the adoption of iron metallurgy, combined with expanding trade networks and resource extraction, produced new concentrations of wealth and influence. These developments transformed the earlier Late Bronze Age communities associated with the Urnfield culture into more stratified societies dominated by regional elites. The archaeological horizon that reflects this transformation is known as the Hallstatt culture, named after discoveries made near the Alpine settlement of Hallstatt. The Hallstatt cultural complex developed across large parts of Central Europe between approximately 800 and 450 BCE. Its core territory included present-day Austria, southern Germany, Switzerland, and portions of eastern France and northern Italy. Archaeological excavations indicate that communities in this region experienced increasing economic specialization and political organization during the early Iron Age. One of the most significant factors shaping this development was access to valuable natural resources. The mountainous regions surrounding Hallstatt contained extensive deposits of salt, a commodity that held considerable economic value in prehistoric Europe due to its essential role in preserving food. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of large-scale salt mining operations in the Hallstatt region dating to the early 1st millennium BCE. Preserved wooden tools, mining shafts, and transport equipment indicate that these mines were carefully organized and maintained over long periods. Records from excavation teams working in the salt mines have revealed organic materials that were exceptionally preserved by the mineral-rich environment. Items such as wooden ladders, leather fragments, and textile remains provide rare insight into daily life and industrial activity during the early Iron Age. The extraction and distribution of salt contributed significantly to the wealth of communities located near the Alpine mining centers. Control of this resource likely allowed local leaders to establish economic dominance over surrounding regions. Trade routes connecting Central Europe with Mediterranean markets expanded during this period, facilitating the exchange of raw materials and luxury goods. Archaeologists have discovered imported artifacts, including decorated drinking vessels, bronze ornaments, and pottery, in elite burial sites throughout the Hallstatt zone. Some of these imported objects originated from Greek and Etruscan workshops located hundreds of kilometers away. These long-distance trade connections demonstrate that Central European societies were increasingly integrated into broader continental exchange systems. River corridors such as the Danube and Rhine provided efficient routes for the transport of goods. Merchants traveling along these waterways connected inland communities with coastal markets in southern Europe. The presence of Mediterranean imports within elite graves indicates that access to foreign luxury items became an important symbol of prestige among emerging aristocratic groups. Burial practices during the Hallstatt period provide some of the clearest evidence for the rise of social hierarchy. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous large burial mounds, known as tumuli, scattered across Central Europe. These monumental graves often contain richly furnished burial chambers constructed from timber and stone. Within these chambers, archaeologists frequently find weapons, ornate jewelry, ceremonial drinking equipment, and imported goods. The scale and complexity of these tombs suggest that they belong to individuals who held significant authority within their communities. Some of the most elaborate Hallstatt burials include chariot graves, in which the deceased was interred alongside a ceremonial wagon or chariot. The presence of these vehicles indicates that mobility and warrior status were closely linked to elite identity. Weapons such as iron swords, spears, and shields commonly accompany these burials, reinforcing the idea that military leadership played a central role in the authority of early Celtic elites. Archaeological studies indicate that such burials were rare and highly selective, implying that only a small segment of the population possessed the wealth and status required for this type of funerary treatment. Settlement patterns during the Hallstatt period further illustrate the development of elite-controlled territories. Many communities established fortified settlements on elevated terrain, including hilltops and ridge lines overlooking important trade routes. These sites often contained defensive earthworks, wooden palisades, and strategically positioned gates. Archaeologists interpret these fortifications as evidence of increasing competition between neighboring groups. Control of trade routes and agricultural land likely became essential for maintaining economic power. Excavations within these hilltop settlements reveal a range of specialized craft activities. Ironworking workshops, pottery kilns, and storage facilities have been identified at several sites. The presence of these industries suggests that some settlements functioned as regional centers of production and administration. Elite households may have supervised the distribution of resources, coordinated trade exchanges, and organized labor for mining and agriculture. Agriculture also expanded during this period, supported by technological improvements associated with iron tools. Iron plowshares and cutting implements allowed farmers to cultivate heavier soils more efficiently than earlier bronze tools had permitted. Archaeobotanical studies indicate increased cultivation of cereals such as wheat and barley during the early Iron Age. Larger agricultural surpluses supported growing populations and provided the economic foundation for emerging political structures. Archaeological evidence suggests that the social organization of Hallstatt communities was built around networks of aristocratic families who controlled both land and trade. These elite lineages likely maintained alliances with neighboring tribes through marriage, diplomacy, and shared economic interests. Although centralized states did not yet exist, the concentration of wealth within elite households indicates that political authority was becoming increasingly hereditary. The material culture associated with the Hallstatt horizon also reflects the emergence of distinctive artistic traditions. Decorative metalwork produced during this period features geometric patterns, stylized animal motifs, and intricate repoussé designs. These artistic styles would later evolve into the more elaborate forms characteristic of later Celtic art. Artifacts recovered from burial contexts demonstrate a high level of craftsmanship, suggesting that specialized artisans worked under the patronage of elite households. The development of these aristocratic societies marked a crucial transition in the evolution of early Celtic culture. Communities that had previously been organized primarily through kinship networks were gradually becoming structured around elite leadership and regional centers of authority. Control over resources, trade routes, and skilled labor allowed certain individuals and families to consolidate power across broader territories. Archaeologists studying the Hallstatt period often view it as the earliest phase in which historically recognizable Celtic societies begin to appear in the archaeological record. Linguistic studies indicate that Proto-Celtic dialects were spreading across much of Central Europe during this time. Although written sources remain absent, the convergence of material culture, settlement patterns, and burial practices provide strong evidence for the emergence of a shared cultural identity among these communities. By the end of the Hallstatt period, elite-controlled networks had expanded across large areas of Central Europe, linking mining centers, agricultural settlements, and trade corridors into interconnected systems of authority. These developments laid the groundwork for the next major transformation in Celtic history, when expanding populations and increasing mobility would carry Celtic cultures far beyond their original Central European homeland. By the 6th century BCE, Celtic tribal societies had established complex political structures built around warrior elites and fortified settlements. Across the landscapes of Central Europe, from the upper Danube basin to the forested regions north of the Alps, communities that had once operated primarily through kinship groups were now forming larger political units. Archaeological and linguistic evidence indicates that these societies organized themselves into tribes governed by hereditary leaders, supported by warrior retinues and extended clan networks. Although no centralized Celtic state existed during this period, regional power structures had begun to emerge through alliances, military leadership, and economic control. The political authority of Celtic leaders was closely tied to aristocratic lineage. Archaeological discoveries from early Iron Age burial sites show that elite individuals were often interred with weapons, chariots, and imported luxury goods. These burial practices suggest that leadership positions were likely inherited within influential families. Control over land, livestock, and trade routes strengthened the authority of these lineages, allowing them to maintain influence across surrounding territories. The power of a chieftain was therefore not based solely on military strength, but also on the ability to distribute resources and maintain alliances among dependent communities. Evidence from fortified settlements provides further insight into the organization of these tribal societies. Across Central Europe, archaeologists have identified numerous hill forts constructed on elevated terrain such as ridges, hillsides, or river promontories. These sites often feature defensive earthworks, wooden palisades, and strategically placed gates. Excavations inside several hill forts have uncovered residential structures, craft workshops, and storage facilities for agricultural goods. Such findings suggest that these settlements served as administrative centers where tribal leaders coordinated economic activity and organized defense. The construction of hill forts reflects both practical and symbolic aspects of political authority. From a defensive perspective, elevated locations offered protection against raids and provided clear views of surrounding territories. At the same time, the visibility of these fortified sites reinforced the presence of elite authority across the landscape. Communities living in nearby agricultural villages likely depended on these centers for protection during periods of conflict. In return, they may have provided agricultural tribute or labor to the ruling elite. The social structure of Celtic tribes appears to have been organized around several interconnected layers. At the top stood the chieftain or ruling aristocrat, whose authority was reinforced by personal reputation, wealth, and lineage. Supporting the leader was a group of elite warriors who formed a retinue or warband. These warriors served not only as soldiers but also as companions and advisors. Loyalty within these groups was often reinforced through gift-giving, shared feasting, and participation in warfare. Below the warrior elite existed a broader population of farmers, herders, and artisans who sustained the economic foundation of tribal society. Archaeological remains from rural settlements reveal evidence of mixed agriculture, including the cultivation of grains, such as barley and wheat alongside livestock herding. Iron tools discovered at these sites suggest increasing agricultural productivity during the early Iron Age. Surpluses produced by these communities likely supported the political and military activities of tribal leaders. Craft specialists also played an important role within these societies. Metalworkers produced iron weapons and tools, while potters created ceramic vessels used for both domestic and ritual purposes. Excavations at certain hill forts reveal dedicated workshop areas where such activities took place. The presence of specialized production areas suggests that elite authorities may have supervised craft activities, controlling the distribution of valuable goods such as weapons and ornaments. Historical references to Celtic populations appear in several early Mediterranean sources. One of the earliest written descriptions is attributed to Herodotus, who mentioned peoples living near the headwaters of the Danube during the 5th century BCE. Although his account was based on indirect reports rather than direct observation, it provides evidence that Celtic-speaking communities were already known to Greek geographers by this time. Later writers would describe the Celts as organized into numerous tribes, each governed by its own leaders and councils. Despite the presence of individual tribal authorities, larger political alliances sometimes formed between neighboring groups. These alliances could arise in response to external threats, particularly during periods of migration or conflict. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain hill forts expanded significantly during the early Iron Age, potentially serving as gathering points for multiple tribes during times of war. Such confederations were not permanent political unions but rather temporary coalitions formed for strategic purposes. Military organization played a central role in maintaining the authority of Celtic leaders. Warrior elites were responsible for defending tribal territory, conducting raids, and securing access to trade routes. Weapons discovered in archaeological contexts, including iron swords, spearheads, and shields, indicate that warfare was a common feature of life in Iron Age Europe. The prestige associated with martial success contributed significantly to a leader's reputation. Victorious warriors could accumulate wealth and honor, reinforcing their position within the social hierarchy. The importance of kinship networks within Celtic political systems cannot be overstated. Tribal identities were often rooted in shared ancestry, with clans tracing their lineage to legendary founders or heroic ancestors. Loyalty to family and clan provided the social cohesion necessary for collective action during warfare or migration. Leaders relied heavily on these kinship bonds to mobilize warriors and maintain unity among their followers. At the same time, trade networks contributed to the consolidation of political authority. Control over key routes connecting Central Europe with Mediterranean markets allowed certain tribal leaders to accumulate wealth through the exchange of goods, such as metalwork, salt, and agricultural products. Imported items discovered in elite graves, including wine vessels and decorative ornaments, demonstrate that access to foreign luxury goods had become an important marker of status. The spread of Celtic languages across large areas of Europe during this period also reflects the expansion of interconnected tribal societies. Linguistic studies suggest that related Celtic dialects developed across regions stretching from the Upper Danube to Western Europe. This distribution likely resulted from both migration and cultural interaction among neighboring communities. Although political authority remained decentralized, shared language and cultural practices helped maintain a broader sense of identity among Celtic groups. The political organization of Celtic tribes therefore represented a balance between local autonomy and regional cooperation. Individual tribes governed their own territories through aristocratic leadership, yet alliances could form when economic or military interests aligned. This flexible structure allowed Celtic societies to adapt to changing conditions across the diverse landscapes of Iron Age Europe. As these political systems developed, authority within Celtic societies was not shaped solely by military power or economic control. Religious institutions and ritual specialists also played a significant role in maintaining social order and legitimizing leadership across tribal communities. Among Celtic societies, religious specialists exercised authority that extended beyond ritual into law, education, and governance. Across Iron Age Europe, religion functioned not as a separate sphere of life, but as an integrated system that shaped political leadership, legal traditions, and communal identity. Although the Celtic peoples left few written records of their own beliefs, evidence from archaeology and classical sources indicates that religious authority played a significant role in maintaining social cohesion. Central to this system were religious figures later described by Mediterranean writers as Druids. One of the most detailed early descriptions of Druids appears in the writings of Julius Caesar, whose account of Gaul during the 1st century BCE provides valuable information about Celtic religious institutions. According to Caesar, Druids formed a distinct social class responsible for overseeing religious ceremonies, interpreting divine will, and adjudicating disputes among tribes. His writings indicate that Druids also functioned as educators, instructing younger members of the elite in law, cosmology, and oral tradition. Although Caesar's perspective was shaped by Roman political interests, many historians consider his account broadly consistent with other ancient sources. Additional references to Druids appear in the works of classical authors such as Strabo and Diodorus Siculus. These writers describe a learned priestly class that held considerable influence within Celtic communities. According to these accounts, Druids possessed knowledge of religious law, astronomy, and philosophy, and their authority often extended across tribal boundaries. In some cases, they were said to mediate disputes between tribes or intervene to halt warfare. While the exact structure of the Druidic hierarchy remains uncertain, these descriptions suggest that religious specialists formed an important intellectual and legal institution within Celtic society. Archaeological discoveries provide additional evidence supporting the existence of organized ritual practices. Across regions once inhabited by Celtic populations, archaeologists have uncovered numerous sites containing ritual deposits. Weapons, jewelry, tools, and animal remains have been found deliberately placed in rivers, lakes, and wetlands. These deposits appear to have been offerings made to supernatural forces believed to inhabit natural landscapes. The repeated appearance of such offerings across large geographic areas suggests the existence of shared religious traditions among Celtic communities. One of the most distinctive aspects of Celtic religious practice was the importance of sacred natural spaces. Rather than constructing monumental temples of stone, many rituals appear to have taken place in forests, riverbanks, and hilltops. Ancient writers frequently mention sacred groves where ceremonies were conducted under the supervision of Druids. Archaeological surveys have identified several woodland sites containing evidence of ritual activity, including pits filled with ceremonial objects and animal bones. These findings indicate that certain natural locations were regarded as spiritually significant gathering places. River systems also played a central role in Celtic ritual practice. Archaeologists have recovered numerous weapons and valuable artifacts from riverbeds throughout Europe, particularly in regions associated with Iron Age Celtic populations. In many cases, These objects appear to have been intentionally deposited rather than lost accidentally. Spears, swords, shields, and decorative ornaments have been found in river channels, often far from nearby settlements. Researchers interpret these discoveries as evidence of ritual offerings intended to honor deities associated with water and the natural environment. The cosmological beliefs underlying these rituals appear to have emphasized the relationship between human communities and the natural world. Although detailed myths from the early Iron Age have not survived, later Celtic traditions recorded in medieval manuscripts provide clues about earlier religious concepts. These texts describe a universe inhabited by multiple divine beings connected to elements such as rivers, forests, and celestial bodies. While such accounts were written many centuries later, scholars often identify similarities between these myths and archaeological evidence from earlier Celtic regions. Oral tradition played a crucial role in preserving religious knowledge within Celtic societies. According to classical sources, Druids avoided committing their teachings to writing, preferring instead to transmit knowledge through memorization and recitation. Caesar reported that students training to become Druids were required to memorize large bodies of verse containing legal, philosophical, and cosmological teachings. This reliance on oral instruction explains the absence of early written religious texts among Celtic peoples. The role of Druids extended beyond religious ceremonies into the sphere of legal authority. Ancient sources suggest that Druids were responsible for interpreting customary laws and resolving disputes within and between tribes. Their judgments carried significant weight because they were believed to reflect divine principles. In this way, religious authority reinforced the political structures of Celtic society by providing a moral framework for leadership and governance. Ritual gatherings likely served additional social functions as well. Archaeologists have identified large open areas near certain hill fort settlements that may have been used for communal ceremonies or seasonal festivals. These gatherings could bring together members of different clans or tribes, strengthening alliances and reinforcing shared cultural traditions. Feasting, music, and storytelling likely accompanied many of these events, further strengthening social cohesion. Animal sacrifice also appears to have been part of Celtic ritual practice. Excavations at several Iron Age sites have uncovered animal bones arranged in ways that suggest ceremonial slaughter rather than ordinary food consumption. In some cases, the remains of cattle, pigs, or horses were deposited alongside ceremonial objects. Such practices may have been intended to honor deities, commemorate victories, or mark important communal events. The authority of Druids within Celtic society therefore rested on multiple foundations: religious expertise, legal knowledge, and educational influence. By interpreting divine will and preserving cultural traditions, these religious specialists helped maintain stability within societies that otherwise lacked centralized political institutions. Their role reinforced the legitimacy of tribal leaders while also providing mechanisms for resolving conflict and maintaining order. Religion also influenced the way Celtic communities understood warfare and leadership. Victories in battle were often interpreted as signs of divine favor, while ritual offerings of captured weapons may have been intended to thank the gods for military success. Such beliefs strengthened the relationship between warrior elites and religious institutions, linking political authority with spiritual legitimacy. Although the precise details of Celtic theology remain uncertain, the combined evidence from classical texts and archaeological discoveries demonstrates that religion occupied a central place in the organization of Iron Age Celtic societies. Ritual specialists guided legal decisions, preserved knowledge, and supervised ceremonies that reinforced communal identity across tribal territories. As Celtic societies expanded their trade networks and increased their economic interactions with neighboring regions, these religious traditions continued to coexist with developing systems of commerce and long-distance exchange across Iron Age Europe. Iron Age trade routes transformed Celtic territories into vital intermediaries between Mediterranean civilizations and Northern Europe. By the 5th century BCE, the communities of Central Europe were no longer isolated agricultural societies. Instead, they had become integrated into extensive economic networks that connected the interior of the European continent with the coastal trading systems of the Mediterranean world. Archaeological discoveries indicate that Celtic territories functioned as important corridors through which goods, technologies, and cultural influences circulated across large distances. One of the most important factors shaping these trade networks was geography. The river systems of Central Europe provided natural transportation routes that allowed goods to move efficiently between regions. Rivers such as the Rhine, Danube, and Rhone connected inland communities to the Mediterranean coast. Archaeologists have identified numerous settlement sites positioned along these waterways, suggesting that river trade played a central role in the economic organization of Celtic societies. Settlements located near major river junctions often grew into regional exchange centers where merchants and local elites could conduct trade. Evidence of Mediterranean contact appears in the form of imported goods discovered at Celtic sites across Central Europe. Excavations have revealed Greek ceramic vessels, bronze drinking cups, and amphorae used for transporting wine and olive oil. Many of these artifacts originate from workshops associated with Mediterranean trading communities such as those in the Greek colony of Massalia. Founded around 600 BCE by Greek settlers, Massalia became an important commercial gateway linking Mediterranean markets with inland European trade routes. Merchants traveling from this coastal city transported luxury goods northward in exchange for valuable resources produced in Celtic territories. Wine appears to have been among the most prominent imported commodities. Amphora fragments discovered in elite Celtic burials and settlement sites indicate that Mediterranean wine was transported in significant quantities into Central Europe. Archaeologists believe that wine consumption often took place during elite feasting rituals, where leaders displayed imported goods as symbols of wealth and status. These social gatherings reinforced political alliances and strengthened the authority of tribal elites who controlled access to such luxury items. In return for Mediterranean goods, Celtic regions supplied a variety of valuable resources. Metalwork represented one of the most important exports. Iron tools and weapons produced by Celtic artisans were widely distributed across Europe. Archaeological finds indicate that Celtic metalworkers possessed advanced technical skills, producing swords, spearheads, agricultural tools, and decorative ornaments. These items were valued not only for their practical use, but also for their craftsmanship and distinctive artistic style. Salt also played a critical role in long-distance trade. Mining operations in alpine regions provided a steady supply of this essential commodity. Salt was particularly valuable in prehistoric societies because it allowed food to be preserved for extended periods, making it crucial for communities that relied on seasonal agriculture. Excavations in the salt-rich regions around the alpine settlement of Hallstatt have revealed extensive mining tunnels and preserved equipment used by early Iron Age workers. Control over salt production allowed local elites to accumulate wealth and strengthen their influence within regional trade networks. Agricultural production formed the economic foundation that supported these expanding trade systems. Archaeobotanical studies indicate that Celtic farmers cultivated crops such as barley, wheat, and millet across much of Central Europe. Improved iron agricultural tools allowed farmers to work heavier soils more efficiently than earlier Bronze Age tools had permitted. As agricultural productivity increased, larger surpluses could be generated. These surpluses supported population growth and allowed communities to dedicate labor to specialized crafts such as metalworking, pottery production, and textile manufacturing. Craft specialization became increasingly visible in archaeological evidence from Iron Age settlements. Excavations at hill fort sites have uncovered workshops containing furnaces, metal molds, and slag deposits associated with ironworking. Pottery kilns and weaving tools have also been discovered, indicating that artisans produced goods for both local use and regional exchange. These workshops were often located within fortified settlements controlled by local elites, suggesting that tribal leaders may have supervised production and trade activities. The circulation of goods across long distances required organized transportation systems. While river routes provided the most efficient means of movement, overland pathways also connected inland communities to major trade corridors. Archaeologists have identified trackways and road-like features linking hill fort settlements with nearby river valleys. Pack animals and wagons were likely used to transport goods across these routes, allowing merchants to move products between different regions of the continent. Archaeological evidence also indicates that trade networks contributed to the spread of artistic styles and technological innovations. Celtic metalwork from the Iron Age exhibits decorative motifs that combine local traditions with influences from Mediterranean art. Curving patterns, geometric designs, and stylized animal forms appear frequently in jewelry and weapon decoration. These artistic styles would later develop further during the period associated with the Latine culture, which succeeded the earlier Hallstatt horizon. The control of trade routes provided significant advantages to tribal leaders. Access to imported goods allowed elites to distribute prestigious objects among their followers, strengthening loyalty and reinforcing social hierarchies. Archaeologists frequently find luxury imports concentrated within elite graves, demonstrating how access to trade goods became closely associated with political authority. By controlling both production and distribution, tribal leaders could maintain their status within increasingly complex economic systems. Long-distance trade also encouraged cultural interaction between Celtic societies and neighboring civilizations. Merchants traveling along trade routes brought not only goods but also ideas, technologies, and artistic influences. These exchanges contributed to the gradual transformation of Celtic communities, introducing new materials and social practices into existing cultural frameworks. The economic networks of Iron Age Europe therefore extended far beyond the boundaries of individual tribes. Celtic territories occupied a strategic position between the Mediterranean world and the northern regions of the continent. Through their control of resources, trade corridors, and craft production, Celtic societies became essential participants in continental exchange systems that connected distant cultures across Europe. As trade expanded and wealth accumulated within elite households, the political and military ambitions of Celtic warrior leaders began to grow. Increased resources allowed these leaders to organize larger warbands and extend their influence beyond the Central European heartland, setting the stage for the widespread migrations and expansions that would characterize the next phase of Celtic history. By the 4th century BCE, Celtic warriors and settlers had spread across vast regions of Europe. Communities that had once been concentrated primarily in the river valleys and uplands of Central Europe were now appearing across an increasingly wide geographic landscape. Archaeological and historical evidence indicates that between the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE, Celtic-speaking populations expanded into territories stretching from the Atlantic coast of Gaul to the northern plains of Italy, from the Iberian Peninsula to the Balkans. These movements reshaped the cultural map of Europe during the Iron Age and established Celtic societies across multiple regions long before the rise of Roman dominance. A key archaeological marker of this expansion is the cultural complex known as the Latine culture. Named after an important archaeological site near Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland, the Latine cultural horizon emerged around the 5th century BCE and spread rapidly across large portions of Europe. Material artifacts associated with this culture, including weapons, tools, jewelry, and decorative metalwork, display distinctive artistic features that archaeologists associate with Celtic craftsmanship. Curvilinear patterns, stylized plant forms, and intricate geometric motifs became characteristic of Latine art and appear across a wide range of objects recovered from archaeological sites. The spread of Latine material culture provides strong evidence for the movement of people as well as ideas. Similar weapon designs, pottery styles, and decorative ornaments appear in regions separated by hundreds of kilometers, indicating sustained interaction between distant communities. Archaeologists interpret this distribution as the result of both migration and cultural diffusion. In some areas, Celtic groups appear to have settled permanently, establishing new communities and integrating with local populations. In other regions, the influence of Celtic material culture likely spread through trade networks and military contact rather than large-scale population movement. One of the earliest directions of Celtic expansion was westward into the region that classical sources would later identify as Gaul. This area, encompassing much of present-day France and parts of Belgium and Switzerland, became one of the major centers of Celtic culture during the later Iron Age. Archaeological excavations across this region reveal numerous settlements, fortified hilltops, and burial sites containing artifacts associated with Latine craftsmanship. The widespread appearance of these materials suggests that Celtic-speaking groups established strong cultural and political networks throughout Western Europe during this period. At roughly the same time, Celtic communities were also moving southward toward the Italian peninsula. Ancient historical sources describe Celtic groups crossing the Alpine mountain passes and entering the fertile plains of northern Italy during the 4th century BCE. These migrants settled in regions that later became known as Cisalpine Gaul. According to Roman historical traditions, one of the most prominent Celtic tribes in this region was the Senans, whose warriors would later play a role in early conflicts with the Roman Republic. The arrival of Celtic settlers in northern Italy brought them into direct contact with Etruscan and Roman populations already established in the region. Expansion also occurred eastward and southeastward across the Danube basin and into the Balkans. Archaeological evidence indicates that Celtic groups advanced along river corridors and trade routes that connected Central Europe with southeastern regions of the continent. These movements sometimes brought Celtic warriors into conflict with established states and kingdoms. Ancient Greek historians recorded encounters between Celtic forces and Hellenistic territories during the 3rd century BCE, demonstrating that the reach of Celtic expansion had extended far beyond its original heartland. In addition to these continental migrations, Celtic cultural influence also reached the British Isles. Although the precise nature of Celtic arrival in Britain and Ireland remains debated among scholars, archaeological evidence indicates that material culture associated with Latin traditions appeared in these regions during the later Iron Age. Metalwork styles, weapon types, and artistic motifs closely resembling those found in continental Europe have been discovered in numerous British and Irish sites. This suggests sustained cultural interaction between the island communities and Celtic societies on the mainland. Trade played an important role in facilitating this cultural diffusion. Merchant networks connected the Atlantic coastline with inland river systems and Mediterranean markets. As goods circulated through these networks, artistic styles and technological knowledge traveled alongside them. Celtic metalworkers adapted techniques and motifs from neighboring cultures, while maintaining distinctive design traditions of their own. The resulting artistic synthesis became one of the defining characteristics of Iron Age Celtic material culture. Warfare also contributed to the spread of Celtic influence. Warrior bands led by tribal leaders often conducted raids into neighboring territories, seeking wealth, livestock, and prestige. Success in battle enhanced the reputation of individual leaders and attracted followers to their retinues. Over time, successful war leaders could gather large groups of warriors capable of moving into new territories. Some of these war bands eventually settled permanently in the regions they entered, establishing new tribal communities. The expansion of Celtic populations did not produce a single unified political system. Instead, the result was a patchwork of regional tribes that shared linguistic and cultural similarities while maintaining independent political structures. Different Celtic groups developed their own identities shaped by local geography, economic conditions, and interactions with neighboring societies. For example, the Celtic tribes of Gaul differed in organization and customs from those established in northern Italy or the Iberian Peninsula. Despite this regional diversity, several cultural features remained widely shared among Celtic communities. Similar styles of weaponry, personal ornamentation, and artistic expression appear across large geographic areas. Linguistic studies also indicate that related Celtic dialects were spoken across these regions, suggesting ongoing communication and interaction among different tribes. Archaeological evidence further indicates that the movement of Celtic groups contributed to the establishment of new settlement patterns. In many regions, fortified hilltop settlements became focal points for political authority and economic exchange. These sites often controlled surrounding agricultural land and monitored nearby trade routes. Their construction reflects both defensive concerns and the desire of tribal leaders to demonstrate authority within newly settled territories. The expansion of Celtic societies during the 5th through 3rd centuries BCE therefore represents one of the most significant demographic and cultural movements of Iron Age Europe. Through migration, trade, and warfare, Celtic-speaking communities established themselves across a vast area of the continent. These developments laid the foundation for the diverse Celtic societies encountered by Mediterranean civilizations in the centuries that followed. As Celtic groups continued to expand into regions bordering the Mediterranean world, encounters with established civilizations became increasingly frequent, bringing Celtic warriors into direct contact with the powerful states of southern Europe. By the early 4th century BCE, Celtic warbands were capable of confronting some of the most powerful states of the Mediterranean world. As Celtic populations expanded beyond their Central European heartland, their movements brought them into direct contact with established civilizations along the northern edges of the Mediterranean basin. Greek trading colonies, Etruscan cities, and the growing power of the Roman Republic all occupied territories that Celtic groups would eventually enter through migration, trade, or warfare. These encounters introduced Celtic societies into a wider geopolitical arena, where tribal warbands began to challenge states that possessed organized armies and urban centers. Ancient sources provide several accounts of early conflicts between Celtic groups and Mediterranean societies. One of the most dramatic episodes described in classical history occurred during the early 4th century BCE, when Celtic forces crossed the Alpine passes into northern Italy. Roman historical tradition records that these migrants included the tribe known as the Senons. According to Roman accounts, the Senons advanced southward into the Italian peninsula and eventually confronted Roman forces near the river Allia in 390 BCE. The Roman army suffered a decisive defeat, allowing the Celtic warriors to march directly toward the city of Rome. The subsequent sack of Rome became one of the most famous events associated with early Celtic warfare. Ancient Roman historians attributed the leadership of this campaign to the Gallic chieftain Brennus. According to these accounts, Celtic warriors entered the city after Roman defenses collapsed and occupied parts of the settlement for several months. While details of the event vary among ancient sources, most agree that the attack exposed the vulnerability of Rome during its early development. The episode later became an important part of Roman historical memory, symbolizing both the dangers posed by northern tribes and the resilience of the Roman state. Although the sack of Rome was a dramatic moment in Mediterranean history, it was not an isolated event. Celtic expansion during this period produced numerous encounters with neighboring civilizations. Greek historians recorded similar movements of Celtic groups across southeastern Europe during the 3rd century BCE. One of the most notable accounts comes from the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who described Celtic incursions into the Balkans and the territories of Hellenistic kingdoms. These campaigns brought Celtic warriors into contact with armies trained in the military traditions established by the successors of Alexander the Great. In 279 BCE, several Celtic tribes advanced into the Balkans and eventually reached the region of Greece itself. Ancient writers describe how Celtic forces moved southward through Macedonia and Thessaly before encountering Greek resistance near the sanctuary of Delphi. Although the details of this campaign remain debated among historians, the event demonstrates the remarkable mobility of Celtic warbands. Groups originating from Central Europe had traveled hundreds of kilometers, entering territories that lay at the heart of the Mediterranean cultural world. Some Celtic groups did not simply raid these regions but established permanent settlements. After the Balkan campaigns, a number of Celtic migrants crossed into Asia Minor, where they eventually settled in the central Anatolian region that became known as Galatia. These settlers maintained their Celtic identity while interacting with local populations and the surrounding Hellenistic states. The creation of Galatia illustrates how Celtic migrations could result in long-lasting communities far from their original homeland. The military organization of Celtic societies played a central role in enabling these movements. Celtic warfare was typically conducted by warrior elites supported by groups of fighters drawn from tribal communities. These warriors were equipped with iron weapons, including long slashing swords, spearheads, and oval shields. Archaeological discoveries from burial sites and battlefield contexts confirm the widespread use of iron weaponry during the Iron Age. Some graves also contain helmets and chainmail armor, indicating that certain warriors possessed advanced protective equipment. Celtic battle tactics emphasized mobility and individual bravery. Classical authors frequently describe Celtic warriors advancing into battle with loud war cries and elaborate displays intended to intimidate their opponents. Personal combat played an important role in establishing reputation and honor among warrior elites. Leaders who demonstrated courage and success in battle could attract larger retinues of followers, increasing their political influence within tribal societies. Despite this emphasis on individual valor, Celtic warbands were capable of coordinated military action. Archaeological evidence suggests that large groups of warriors could assemble under the leadership of prominent chieftains when major campaigns were undertaken. These temporary coalitions allowed multiple tribes to participate in large-scale raids or migrations. However, such alliances were typically short-lived and dissolved once immediate objectives were achieved. Encounters with Mediterranean civilizations also exposed Celtic warriors to new military technologies and organizational structures. Greek and Etruscan armies relied heavily on disciplined infantry formations and standardized equipment. Over time, Celtic groups appear to have adopted certain elements of these systems. Archaeological discoveries show increasing variation in armor and weapon design during the later Iron Age, suggesting that Celtic warriors incorporated innovations encountered during their campaigns. Trade and cultural contact accompanied these military encounters as well. Even in regions where warfare occurred, Celtic societies continued to participate in exchange networks linking northern Europe with Mediterranean markets. Imported artifacts discovered in Celtic territories, including decorated pottery and luxury metalwork, demonstrate that economic interaction often continued alongside political rivalry. The expansion of Celtic warbands therefore contributed significantly to the spread of Celtic cultural influence across Europe. Through migration, conflict, and settlement, Celtic communities established themselves in territories stretching from the Atlantic coast to the eastern Mediterranean. These movements brought Celtic societies into direct contact with some of the most sophisticated civilizations of the ancient world. At the same time, the decentralized political structure of Celtic tribes limited the possibility of forming large unified states comparable to those of the Mediterranean. Tribal autonomy remained a defining characteristic of Celtic society, even as individual leaders achieved temporary prominence through military success. Despite their ability to challenge established powers through mobility and warfare, the internal diversity of Celtic tribes would ultimately shape the political landscape of Celtic Europe in the centuries that followed. At their height, Celtic societies controlled large portions of Europe and maintained vibrant economic and cultural networks. During the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, Celtic communities extended across a vast geographic range that included Gaul, much of Central Europe, parts of the Iberian Peninsula, northern Italy, the British Isles, and the Anatolian region of Galatia. Although these regions were inhabited by numerous distinct tribes, shared linguistic traditions, artistic styles, and social institutions created recognizable cultural connections among them. Archaeological evidence from this period demonstrates that Celtic societies had developed complex economic systems, fortified urban centers, and sophisticated artistic traditions. One of the most significant developments during this period was the emergence of large fortified settlements known as oppida. These sites began appearing across Gaul and Central Europe during the late Iron Age and served as regional centers of political authority, economic production, and trade. The term oppidum was later used by Roman writers, particularly Julius Caesar, to describe the major fortified towns encountered during Roman campaigns in Gaul. Archaeological excavations reveal that many oppida were located on elevated terrain or strategically positioned near major trade routes and river systems. Oppida often covered large areas, sometimes exceeding several hundred hectares in size. Excavations within these settlements have uncovered evidence of organized street patterns, workshops, storage facilities, and residential zones. Defensive walls constructed from timber, earth, and stone protected these communities from potential attack. One notable defensive design is the Murus Gallicus, a type of fortification described in Roman sources and confirmed through archaeological investigation. This construction technique combined wooden beams with stone and earth to create strong defensive barriers capable of resisting siege attempts. The emergence of oppida reflects a broader transformation within Celtic societies during the late Iron Age. These settlements functioned not only as defensive strongholds but also as centers of administration and economic coordination. Tribal elites likely used these locations to manage regional resources, organize trade activities, and host political assemblies. The concentration of population and economic activity within oppida suggests increasing social complexity within Celtic territories. Craft production played a central role in the economy of these settlements. Archaeological discoveries from oppida sites reveal specialized workshops dedicated to metalworking, pottery production, and textile manufacturing. Celtic artisans were particularly renowned for their expertise in ironworking. Weapons, tools, and agricultural implements produced in these workshops circulated widely through regional exchange networks. In addition to practical items, Celtic craftsmen created elaborate decorative objects that demonstrated both technical skill and aesthetic innovation. Celtic artistic expression reached a distinctive peak during this period. The visual style associated with the late Iron Age is characterized by intricate curvilinear patterns, stylized animal forms, and complex geometric designs. These motifs appear on a wide variety of objects, including jewelry, weapon fittings, ceremonial vessels, and personal ornaments. Archaeologists frequently identify these decorative elements as part of the artistic tradition linked to the Tène culture, which had developed earlier in Central Europe and continued to influence Celtic craftsmanship across the continent. Coin production also expanded during this era. Several Celtic tribes began minting their own coinage, often inspired by Greek and Macedonian prototypes. These coins frequently displayed abstracted images derived from Mediterranean designs but adapted to local artistic conventions. The circulation of coinage suggests increasing economic sophistication, as well as the influence of Mediterranean trading practices on Celtic societies. Coins facilitated commercial exchange and may also have served as symbols of political authority for tribal leaders. Agriculture remained the foundation of the Celtic economy. Communities cultivated grains such as wheat and barley while also maintaining herds of cattle, sheep, and pigs. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements indicates that farming communities supplied food and raw materials to the larger population centers located in Oppida. Storage pits and granaries discovered at several sites demonstrate the importance of managing agricultural surpluses, particularly in regions supporting dense populations. Trade networks continued to link Celtic territories with Mediterranean civilizations. Goods such as wine, ceramics, and luxury ornaments arrived from Greek and later Roman merchants operating along the southern frontiers of Celtic Europe. Archaeologists have uncovered imported amphorae and fine pottery within numerous Celtic settlements, confirming the existence of sustained commercial exchange. These goods were often concentrated in elite residences or burial contexts, suggesting that access to imported commodities remained closely tied to social status. Written accounts from Mediterranean authors provide additional insights into Celtic societies during this period. Greek and Roman writers observed Celtic communities primarily through the lens of trade, diplomacy, and warfare. Among these observers was the Greek geographer Strabo, who compiled descriptions of various European peoples based on earlier sources and contemporary reports. His writings describe aspects of Celtic social organization, including the presence of warrior elites, religious specialists, and tribal leadership structures. Despite these shared cultural features, Celtic Europe remained politically fragmented. Tribal confederations occasionally formed alliances for military or economic purposes, but long-term political unity rarely emerged. Each tribe maintained its own leadership hierarchy and territorial boundaries. Authority often rested with aristocratic families whose power derived from control of land, military reputation, and participation in long-distance trade. This decentralized political system offered certain advantages, allowing local leaders to adapt quickly to changing economic and military circumstances. However, it also limited the ability of Celtic societies to coordinate large-scale political or military responses across the entire region. As long as external threats remained limited, tribal autonomy functioned effectively within the broader Celtic cultural landscape. By the 2nd century BCE, Celtic societies had established one of the most extensive cultural networks in Iron Age Europe. Their settlements, trade systems, artistic traditions, and warrior institutions shaped the political and economic dynamics of the continent for several centuries. From the Atlantic coast to the Balkans, Celtic communities played a major role in regional exchange and conflict, interacting with neighboring cultures across a wide geographic range. Yet the same decentralized political structure that allowed Celtic societies to flourish locally would present significant challenges when confronted by the expanding power of Mediterranean states. As Rome extended its influence northward, the fragmented nature of Celtic tribal politics would increasingly shape the outcome of future conflicts across Europe. By the 1st century BCE, Roman expansion had begun reshaping the political map of Celtic Europe. Over the preceding centuries, the Roman Republic had steadily extended its influence across the Italian peninsula, establishing colonies and fortifications that consolidated control over neighboring territories. By the 2nd century BCE, Roman campaigns moved beyond the peninsula into regions inhabited by Celtic tribes, particularly northern Italy, historically referred to as Cisalpine Gaul and Southern Gaul. These incursions represented both a direct military threat and a broader transformation of political and economic structures across Western Europe. The Roman approach to expansion combined military conquest with strategic settlement. Roads, bridges, and fortified colonies were constructed to facilitate the rapid movement of troops and supplies into newly subjugated areas. Archaeological evidence from northern Italy reveals networks of roads and fortifications built during this period, demonstrating the logistical sophistication that allowed Roman forces to sustain long-term campaigns against mobile Celtic warbands. Colonies served as administrative centers and outposts of Roman authority, integrating conquered territories into the broader framework of the Republic. Military confrontations between Roman legions and Celtic forces became increasingly frequent during the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE. Classical accounts, particularly the writings of Julius Caesar, provide detailed descriptions of Celtic tribal organization, fortification strategies, and battlefield tactics. Caesar observed that Celtic societies were organized around tribal hierarchies, led by aristocratic families and warrior elites, with each tribe maintaining significant autonomy. Leadership often depended on the personal prestige and martial reputation of chieftains, who could assemble war bands capable of challenging neighboring tribes or external powers. The most consequential phase of Roman-Celtic conflict occurred during the Gallic Wars between 58 and 50 BCE. Caesar's campaigns targeted numerous Celtic tribes across Gaul, aiming to subdue independent polities and secure Roman control over the region. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with these campaigns, including fortifications and temporary encampments, confirms the extensive scale of Roman military operations. The legion's capacity to construct siege works, bridge rivers, and coordinate multi-front engagements demonstrated logistical and organizational advantages that Celtic warbands could rarely match over sustained campaigns. Celtic resistance during this period was substantial and often coordinated. The most notable example is the uprising led by Vercingetorix in 52 BCE. Vercingetorix united multiple Gallic tribes in a concerted effort to repel Roman advances, employing scorched earth tactics and fortified settlements to impede Caesar's campaigns. Archaeological excavations of hill forts and oppida associated with this rebellion reveal evidence of destruction and rebuilding, illustrating both the intensity of conflict and the strategic significance of urban strongpoints in Gallic defense. Despite these efforts, Roman military discipline and organizational capacity ultimately proved decisive. Caesar's legions systematically besieged key oppida, exploiting superior training, siege technology, and logistical support. After the surrender of major Gallic strongholds, Roman authority was established across much of Gaul. The integration of conquered territories involved both military occupation and political co-optation, as local leaders were absorbed into the Roman administrative framework, often retaining some degree of nominal authority under Roman oversight. Roman sources provide additional insight into Celtic society during this period. Caesar noted the importance of social hierarchy, the role of Druids in legal and religious functions, and the mobility of tribal warbands. His accounts, while written with political objectives in mind, remain crucial for reconstructing Celtic political structures and understanding the strategies employed during resistance. Complementary archaeological evidence corroborates many aspects of these descriptions, including the presence of fortified settlements, weapon assemblages, and patterns of destruction consistent with prolonged military engagement. Beyond military confrontation, Roman expansion introduced new economic and administrative structures into Celtic regions. Roads facilitated trade and communication between previously isolated territories, while colonies and garrison towns established centers of taxation, resource extraction, and population control. Over time, these measures reshaped settlement patterns, encouraging urbanization and integration into the Roman economic system. Artifacts such as imported Roman pottery and coinage appear in formerly independent Celtic settlements, indicating both commercial exchange and cultural influence. The consequences of Roman expansion were uneven across Celtic Europe. Some communities were directly incorporated into the Republic, while others remained semi-autonomous client territories or allies. The consolidation of Roman authority disrupted traditional tribal alliances and limited the capacity of Celtic warbands to operate independently. However, elements of Celtic governance, religious practice, and artistic expression persisted even under Roman oversight. Hill fort settlements, ritual sites, and localized craft traditions continued to function alongside new imperial institutions. The advance of Rome also had a lasting impact on military organization. Celtic tribes observed Roman discipline, formations, and logistical methods, which influenced subsequent approaches to warfare in both Gallic and more distant Celtic regions. Interactions with Roman forces highlighted the advantages of centralized command and coordinated strategy over decentralized tribal warbands, underscoring structural differences that would shape future conflicts. By the end of the 1st century BCE, the expansion of the Roman Republic had fundamentally altered the political landscape of Western Europe. Celtic territories that had once been autonomous, connected through regional alliances and trade networks, were now increasingly integrated into a larger imperial system. Military defeat, strategic settlement, and administrative oversight consolidated Roman power, transforming the governance, economy, and security structures of the continent. Although Roman conquest reshaped these territories, Celtic cultural practices did not disappear entirely. Religious traditions, artistic styles, and elements of social hierarchy persisted under Roman rule. Archaeological evidence shows continued use of ritual sites, local production of Latin-inspired metalwork, and maintenance of regional customs alongside Roman urban and administrative developments. These enduring features illustrate how Celtic identity adapted to the new political framework while retaining aspects of its pre-Roman heritage. The Roman advance into Celtic Europe thus represents both a decisive military transformation and a broader process of cultural integration. It marks the transition from a landscape dominated by independent Celtic polities to one increasingly structured under Roman authority, setting the stage for the social and cultural synthesis that would characterize the region in the centuries to follow. Although Rome reshaped the political map of Europe, Celtic cultural traditions remained deeply embedded in many regions. Even after the systematic incorporation of Gaul, northern Italy, and other territories into the Roman Republic, elements of Celtic language, art, religion, and social practice continued to persist. Linguistic evidence demonstrates that Celtic-derived languages survived in areas such as Britain, Ireland, and parts of Gaul, influencing local dialects and later medieval vernaculars. These languages provided continuity with earlier Iron Age cultures and contributed to the shaping of regional identities well beyond the Roman period. Artistic and craft traditions also endured, often blending with Roman techniques to create hybrid forms. Latin-style motifs, including stylized animals, intricate geometric patterns, and curvilinear designs, appear in metalwork, pottery, and jewelry discovered in Roman period contexts. Archaeological finds from settlements and burial sites suggest that artisans continued to produce locally inspired designs even under Roman administration. Such continuity indicates that Celtic cultural expressions were resilient, adapting to new political realities while preserving recognizable aesthetic characteristics. Religious practices likewise exhibited remarkable persistence. Although Roman religion and imperial cults became prominent across conquered territories, archaeological evidence demonstrates ongoing Celtic ritual activity. Deposits in rivers, ritual objects, and the continued use of sacred groves suggest that local populations maintained pre-Roman ceremonial traditions. Druids and other religious specialists may have gradually lost political authority under Roman rule, but the underlying cosmological framework remained influential, especially in rural communities less directly affected by imperial administration. Social customs, including hierarchical structures and communal gatherings, also survived in adapted forms. Excavated settlements reveal continuity in housing patterns, land use, and localized economic activity, indicating that daily life retained elements of pre-Roman organization. Festivals, feasting practices, and the symbolic display of wealth through imported or locally produced luxury items appear to have persisted, preserving aspects of Celtic identity in a transformed political context. Medieval manuscripts later preserved fragments of Celtic mythology and oral tradition, offering further evidence of cultural endurance. Texts such as the Irish Liber Gabala Iren or the Welsh Mabinogion, though compiled centuries after the Roman period, contain stories and motifs that reflect pre-Roman belief systems, including heroic narratives, genealogies of tribal leaders, and cosmological frameworks. These surviving literary elements provide valuable insight into the conceptual and symbolic world of Iron Age Celtic societies. The survival of Celtic traditions also underscores the complexity of cultural interaction during the Roman period. Rather than a simple replacement of local customs, the Roman presence facilitated selective adaptation. Celtic artistic, linguistic, and religious forms were integrated into imperial contexts, creating new cultural syntheses. Coins, metalwork, and decorative objects illustrate how Celtic motifs were incorporated alongside Roman symbols, producing artifacts that reflect hybridized identities. Archaeological evidence from northern Britain and Ireland illustrates the endurance of Celtic material culture in regions beyond direct Roman administration. Hill forts, ritual deposits, and distinctive metal objects indicate continuity in settlement and craft practices, demonstrating that Celtic traditions remained a vibrant part of local life. These regions acted as repositories of pre-Roman culture, preserving knowledge and practices that were subsequently transmitted through generations. Historians and archaeologists continue to reassess the significance of Celtic cultural persistence. Linguistic studies, comparative material culture analyses, and reevaluation of classical sources have revealed the depth of pre-Roman influence on subsequent European developments. For example, elements of social organization, craftsmanship, and artistic expression originating in Celtic Europe contributed to regional identities in Gaul, Britain, and beyond, even as Roman infrastructure and governance reshaped the political landscape. The endurance of Celtic traditions provides insight into the broader dynamics of cultural continuity and transformation. It illustrates how societies can retain core aspects of identity while adapting to external pressures, including political conquest and economic integration. Archaeological and textual evidence together reveal a pattern of selective preservation, adaptation, and innovation that characterized Celtic life during and after the Roman expansion. Ultimately, the legacy of the Celts extends into modern understanding of European prehistory and early history. Place names, linguistic traces, artistic motifs, and mythological narratives provide a tangible connection to Iron Age societies that predated Roman domination. Continued research into settlement patterns, trade networks, and ritual practices further illuminates the scope and complexity of Celtic cultural influence. The study of Celtic survivals also emphasizes the importance of interdisciplinary research. Archaeology, linguistics, classical sources, and comparative anthropology together contribute to a nuanced understanding of how these societies adapted, resisted, and influenced broader historical trajectories. Ongoing discoveries and reinterpretations continue to refine scholarly appreciation of the Celts' role in shaping European cultural landscapes. By the end of the Roman conquest, Celtic societies had been transformed politically but not erased culturally. The persistence of language, art, religion, and social structures highlights the resilience of pre-Roman traditions and their capacity to influence subsequent historical developments. The legacy of the Celts, therefore, remains a critical component of the historical record, offering insights into the formation of early European identities and the enduring impact of Iron Age societies. The legacy of the Celts continues to shape historical understanding of Iron Age Europe and its diverse cultural landscapes. Before you continue exploring the ancient past, hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to get daily Nightfall history videos. Share your thoughts in the comments. What aspect of Celtic history fascinated you the most? Your engagement helps uncover more hidden stories of the past.